Hey guys, this is Expert John. Today we're be talking about access control. It's one of the next sections of chapter 8 of the Cybersecurity Analyst Guide. This is probably one of the trickiest parts of the exam, as there are two terms that are almost synonymous. Their acronyms are exactly the same, except they have different words used for the R. But I felt like with this exam guide, it was very simple. So maybe I guess it will be simple for you guys too. So access control models are the ones used by Active Directory or by system administrators to lease access to the workers. That way they could do their job while also being secure. Just read a tiny footnote. In addition to authenticating and authorizing subjects, managing who can access or use resources is a critical part of IMA, no, IAM, sorry, systems. Whereas identity access management systems and privilege management. Organizations typically choose an access control model based on such factors as the level of control they need, their security and compliance requirements, and their technical and administrative capability to implement and maintain them. And so, even though the exam does not fully require you to know all these, as it's not even part of the objectives, they do ask about discretionary access control and rule-based access control. So those are the two ones that are I want to write down. So let's get into them. I'll just start from the top and then fully explain the exam note. So role-based access control. This is where a certain type of role is giving certain permissions, sets of permissions to do the job. So let's say if you're in accounting, you need to access the databases. So you will have access to the database because you're on that role. However, if you're doing perhaps billing or not even billing, where you're doing project management, you certainly do not have access to change the product if it's like a software. Only a person with that role could do that. So it stands for, so the acronym it gives you is RBAC, RBAC. This is the same as rule-based access control. And so, but more or less, every time you see in the field, it's likely role-based access control, not the latter. And so the next one we have is attribute-based access control. This one's a little bit more complicated. For this one, it gives user rights based on the policies use collection of attributes to determine which access rights to grant, thus building logic based on collection of rights. They're pretty flexible and context-sensitive access control model, and they are combining attributes that describe the subject, like their role, division, or other things, or other flipping page, or other personal attributes. That's what it is. Oh, and the access they are trying to perform attribute or the attributes of the object that they are attempting to access or use, and environmental attributes like the time of day or location allows complex access control logic with a fine grain control. So I guess an example they kind of highlighted if it's a certain type of day, you would not have control. While if it being during your work hours, you would. Or based on location, if you're somewhere in, I guess, the Middle East and you're not in America where you're supposed to be working, They will not allow you to have control. Next up, we have mandatory access control. This one's a bit more easier. The second time me coming to this because I did learn all of this when I took my Security Plus exam. That was 3 years. Or it's about to be 3 years that I earned that. So mandatory access control rely on the operating system to control what subjects can access and what actions it can perform. Due to design, MAC, as they abbreviate it, usually relies on system administrator to implement access control policies. Since it is relatively rigid, these these implementations have typically been associated with military systems, although an increasing number of operating systems and security packages implement MAC capabilities. So if the system administrator gives your computer access to access financials, regardless who uses the computer, they're going to have that access. So that's where the mandatory part comes in. A lot of these have very fitting names. It just takes some time to kind of think about it. And I would say it's quite important. Maybe if you're like working in government and you see that a lot of systems do have mandatory access control, not role based or rule based. The other ones would be more in the private sector. So here's the other RBAC, as we already mentioned, role based access control. There's this other one called rule based access control, and this one is based on a set of rules implemented by the administrator, known as ACLs, access control lists, and they're associated to each object, and rules are checked against the ACL when access required. So if I were to access something, it would have to go through these lists of one, do I have the authorization to do this? Do I have the authentication to do this? And if those fit and the system administrator give it to me, then yeah, I could access it. So here's one of the last things. This one is not very overt or conspicuous. This is called discretionary access control. So these systems delegate control to the administrators or owners of protected resources like systems or data. This allows delegated control, requires trust in the choices that the owners and administrators make, and can cause issues due to the lack of central access control. So this is depending on whether the administrator feels like you need it or if you don't. Is based on their discretion. As you can see, that's the reason why they name it that. It's based solely on the discretion of the person handing out these permissions. And again, it talks about the flaw. It's not very centralized. And so if you were to, you have a breach and you're trying to pinpoint who accessed what, if there was a privilege escalation, then you would have to go through each of the lists, the controls that you gave everyone. And since there's no model, then it makes it a lot harder because uh, it's more on the base or based on the contacts of the people that work for you. So this is one of the last things. This is something new I learned: validating access, the manual review and automated review. And this ensures that users don't have more rights than they should, and it's an important part of identity management. In many cases, organizations use manual review process to validate roles and rights, particularly when staff members change jobs or take on a new role. And it talks about like a joke, and there's a joke in there. Well, it's not really a joke, it's just kind of like a reality they mention. Staff who are charged with permission management cringe when they hear requests for rights like just make my new employee's rights match the person currently in the role. Of course, it's never the same. The role could mean people could have the same role but have a higher level of control. And it talks about how manual review is time consuming and error prone. So automated tools can remove much of the burden that manual validation creates, especially when paired with tools that look out for out of the ordinary user behavior. Overly broad privileges and role grants do not match the organizational structure. This is not part of the objectives, but automated review. Uh, oh no, this is part of the objectives. Only manual review is part of that exam objective. So it's important to understand what these reviews are and what tools are associated to it. And I think that's it. So we went through all those access controls. We're going to continue on to threats to identity and access. This would be going into attacks. Well, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you have any questions, just comment down below. The image I just have up there is just kind of a an example of role-based access control. See if I can move my camera out of the way. You can probably see, yeah, permit request. Sorry about that. Well, anyway, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Until next time.